Have you muted everybody, Ria?
I can stop the screen sharing
for a
second so that we
Yes.
can see everyone.
Sure. Yeah, I think there's no one in the waiting room as of now.
Okay.
But I expect people will come in.
Yeah, there'll probably be a few late arrivals. And good afternoon and good evening to everyone. Nice to see all of you again. This is the 5th session that we've had over the last several months. That is a webinar series that have built into the framework for preparing the Handbook of Research on Sustainable Lifestyles. And I know a number of you are still scribbling away on your chapters, and we look forward to receiving them soon. And several have already begun to arrive, and we will in coming days initiate a review process for the chapters that have come in, and then as the successive ones begin to arrive. So keep your eyes open for that announcement on the procedures that we'll put in place for executing that process. But on the agenda for today is a timely, interesting, and I think compelling presentation by 2 contributors to the handbook, Maike Gossen from the Technical University in Berlin and Laura Niessen from Maastricht. They are going to provide us with an overview of their chapter that also draws on significant amount of work that they've been doing on this topic over the last number of years, that is focused on business opportunities to promote sufficiency-oriented lifestyle. So I don't want to take up any more time from them. I'm going to turn over the webinar to Maike and Lauren and Laura. And I think Maike is going to begin, and then Laura will take the second half of the presentation. I've asked them to speak for about a half an hour, and then we'll hopefully have plenty of time for some questions and discussion. So, Maike, over to you.
Yeah, welcome, and thanks for inviting us to present our work and focus on what we've written in the book chapter. Let me share my screen. Okay, I think this works, right? Yeah, I got a thumbs up from Laura. Thank you. Yeah, maybe we just, or let me at least tell you the title of the presentation and also of the book chapter, which is Business Opportunities to Promote Sufficiency-Oriented Lifestyles. And we will start with just some brief background information on the problem we are looking at, or for which we are might find some solutions in the business sector, and then we will dive into present some of the strategies we identified of the company, of the business sector, in order to promote sufficiency-oriented lifestyles. Of course, we came across some barriers to the mainstreaming of sufficiency business strategies, which we would like to discuss with you, and then we give you some further, or some ideas for further research questions and an outlook on the topic. Yeah, I'm sure you've all seen these graphs with the 24 global trends in socio-economic and earth system developments from the beginning of the Industrial Revolution until today. And they, these patterns, they suggest that we are living in an area known as the Anthropocene, which is characterized by a rapid and fundamental human-induced change to Earth systems around the world. And to cite this quote, this situation requires radical departures from the status quo to shift the unsustainable pathways towards what is called a good Anthropocene by the authors I'm citing here, in which normative goals for sustainability are achieved, and political and economic power structures promote the common good. And what is striking or interesting from our point of view here is that they also call on businesses as on the one hand contributors of the current situation, but also supporters of the radical transformation and the change which is requested. So in our view, this radical transformation of the economy implies the need to integrate a sufficiency perspective into the economy. And we rely on the work of Wolfgang Sachs and others. Wolfgang Sachs was one of the first scholars to advocate a sufficiency economy early in the 1990s. And following him, this would mean that companies support 4 forms of less that contribute to saving resources while increasing human well-being. And these 4 lesses are less clutter, less speed, less distance, and less market. And we will find out later when Laura presents the business strategies for sufficiency, what this could mean in detail, or at the micro level and translate it into business strategies. But before that, I would like to briefly speak about another conceptualization of sufficiency in the business sector. And these 2 authors, Jessica Junghel Michelsen and Pasi Haikkonen, they did a systematic literature review, and based on this, they understand sufficiency as having both indirect and direct effects on companies. And indirectly, it is their responsibility to influence consumers and their behavior and implement strategies aimed at actively reducing and changing or shifting consumption to alternative modes of consumption. And the more direct understanding of sufficiency for companies goes beyond influencing consumers and also integrates production itself. This means that this actually means a direct limitation or reduction of production volumes. And I think with this, I can give you the word, Laura, and you will present some or more insights on concrete business model strategies and marketing strategies.
Yes, thanks very much, Maike. There will be a bit of going back and forth in this presentation because Maike and I have different foci in our work. So I look at the business model side while Maike looks at the marketing side a bit more. I hope we'll be keeping you on your toes because you have to be paying attention to who's speaking to you at the moment. So when we talk about sufficiency-oriented businesses, we oftentimes look at the business models. And as Maike just said, that looks at both upstream production, so limiting production in the business itself to only producing what is actually needed in a sense, but also downstream consumption, and that is influencing the consumer. If you just want to click, so all the text is there, Maike. I don't really need the animations. Yes. So what we can say in influencing consumers is there might be a business model change in the business towards what some have termed encouraging consumers to make do with less. You could also say it's more about encouraging people to consume only what they need while providing alternatives. So as Maike mentioned, businesses do not just have a responsibility in that they are part of the problem, but they also have a role because they can actually provide the sustainable alternative or provide the option not to consume to customers, which is where this business model change comes in. It's also about rethinking business itself, the relation to consumption. Do people need to consume? How much do they need to consume? But also in the business, rethinking your relation to others, to your suppliers, to your customers. How do you want to relate to them? And rethinking organizational meaning, which is, why are we a business? Is it because we're profit driven? Is it just about the profit imperative, or do we have other purpose as the business? And one of the things we look at in our research is trying to understand businesses that already promote sufficiency and what type of strategies they use. So the next slide there is about some of the ways we've tried to understand the strategies and conceptualize them. And as Maike mentioned, we use the 4 lessons developed by Wolfgang Sachs. So less stuff, but also longer lifetimes, consuming more locally, and trying to even consume outside of the market structure. And that has been combined with what may be the 3 highest steps on the waste hierarchy: think, reduce, refuse. But we've tried to understand them as a message from the business to the consumer, telling the consumer to consume differently, less, or not at all. So it's, in a sense, becoming more radical along the axis. I'm not going into depth now with the different strategies because there's 16 of them, but just to point some out. So for instance, if we want to look at telling the consumer to consume less, which is the middle pillar, but also want to reduce speed, we can, as a business, try to offer a very long product warranty so that the product can be repaired if anything breaks. And we can combine that with a life extension service, which might be, for instance, repair or refurbishment. In that sense, ideally, the product would not need to be replaced because it would still continue to be used for a longer time. Now, there's a lot of strategies here, and you can also see in the review side, there's some more interesting ones maybe, like not offering sales, moderating sales, or openly questioning consumption. But when we've looked at these businesses, and we found over 160, and when we try to understand what of those strategies they actually use, it is unsurprisingly usually the low-hanging fruit. So oftentimes they try to offer a green alternative, maybe a more sustainable product because it may be locally produced, or it may be secondhand, but it's not necessarily actually changing the business model. It's just changing the product or service. And many also just may stick to awareness raising. So having blog posts or having social media about sufficiency, but not necessarily changing their volume-based sales model. So these are really nice strategies, and many businesses, or not that many, but we found quite a few businesses that try to implement them. But with the best of intentions, what are the actual impacts of such strategies as rental models or reuse models? Thanks, Mike, and just whatever text is there can go onto the slide as well. I didn't realize there was animations. Yes, that's it. So we also try to understand what is the impact of strategies that sufficiency promoting businesses use. And it's not always necessarily more sustainable. So there's some research now that looks at rental or sharing offers, for instance, clothing libraries, but also at reuse of clothing. And they find that it may have a worse environmental performance if the service isn't designed correctly because of all the additional impacts in transport, in washing, and so on. And in reuse, for instance, there could be rebound effects in that people are more inclined to consume because it is now cheaper, and there's also more variety in secondhand clothing. It's more unique, so they might find it thrilling. There can be, or there has been, some research on positive outcomes through sufficiency-based business models. One of them looked, for instance, at a pay-per-use washing machine subscription, and that specifically made people pay more. They paid per wash, but they also paid more if they had hotter washes. And they showed with a, I think, 3-month study that people actually reduced the amount of washes they did, and they also washed at a colder temperature because it was cheaper. and they got information about it. So there was awareness raising with it. And we've also had a study looking at bicycle subscription, and it showed that people that may not have cycled beforehand, through the easy access to a bicycle, would potentially give up cars and move away towards better, more sustainable transportation modes. And I think Maike is going to tell you a bit more about the marketing side. Oh, not yet. Sorry. We wanted to give you some good examples because sufficiency business sounds really nice in theory, but what does it mean in practice? And I think Vitsu is quite a nice example. They're based in the UK, and their ethos is living better with less that lasts longer, which is very much sufficiency promoting. They make furniture, and you can see the shelves and the seats in the picture there. And they're designed to be used for a long time, but they're also modular so that your needs change, so the furniture can change accordingly. So you can see, for instance, the couch is just 2 armchairs put together. And if you then move to a smaller space, or your children move out, or whatever reason, you don't need such a big couch anymore, you can actually take it apart and just have 1 or 2 armchairs. It's also made to be specifically durable, repairable, and they very much focus on the service part, where they, instead of getting most money through product sales, get most income through repair, refurbishment, reupholstering, and planning and relocation services. So it's quite high-end furniture, and if you move, you don't necessarily want it damaged, so they actually help you pack it in and set it up in your new place. They specifically try to only sell people what is needed, which is important because staff are trained in the shops to ask, are you sure you need this? Or do you want to go home, think about it, and come back again tomorrow? Because if you still need these new shelves, you can come and get them tomorrow. And that has met with different reactions in different countries where they're based. So they're based in European countries and Japan, but also in the US, where there wasn't that much preference for this question, because oftentimes customers might not be comfortable being asked if that is a good choice. So we'll also talk about cultural differences in sufficiency briefly later. And they specifically try to limit their advertisement to only recommendations. And then another very brief example for a campaign run by a sufficiency business, that's Black Friday. It's a campaign by Citizen Wolf, which are based in Australia. And they, on Black Friday, offer people to send in their clothes. They dye them over professionally and they send them back. It doesn't have to be clothes from the brand. It can be any brand, any type of clothing. And they just want to make the things look new and good again so that people can keep wearing them for longer and don't buy new. And now we're onto the sufficiency marketing.
Exactly. And Laura already presented this campaign as a good example for sufficiency promoting communication. And also gave you more information on how businesses can promote sufficiency within their product and service offerings. And this is the marketing or the advertising pillar or aspect is one of the larger business model and the larger business vision, to say. So just briefly, what sufficiency promoting communication aims at, it is obviously to moderate sale and the promotion of new products, to promote needs over wants, so not to stimulate new consumption desires, but to focus on real consumption needs, whatever this means. I think that's very individual, what you individually say that is like a real or an existential consumer need, but definitely there are some products out there which maybe fulfill or which rather fulfill consumer wants and desires instead of real needs. And also this type of communication aims at promoting convenience and enjoyment of sufficiency-oriented lifestyles. So of lifestyles of less, lifestyles which focus on maybe having more time to spend with your families and friends, to acknowledge the stuff you already have, and not buying more and more of it. And last but not least, what Laura already mentioned is the services sufficiency promoting companies or business models also offer, such as repairing services, sharing, secondhand, or renting, and to make this more attractive to consumers than buying new stuff. Maybe just to add on the examples Laura presented, I here on this slide you can see the most popular sufficiency campaign in history, maybe, which is of Patagonia. I'm sure that you all came across this Don't Buy This Jacket campaign, and which is interesting that this campaign led to an increase in sales rather than a decrease in sales. So yeah, this prompts the question of the effects of sufficiency communication, and we will touch upon this when we are presenting barriers, or maybe we can also talk about this in the discussion after the presentation. And on the slide you can also see some screenshots from a campaign of the secondhand platform, clothing platform Vinted, which is like really new. I just saw it last week, I think, on social media. And as you can see, they play around with the the overconsumption of stuff, which can get quite a little bit silly and absurd when you carry around, I don't know, 15 bags, or when you have 6 sunglasses on your head. So it's a funny and simple way to show what overconsumption actually means. Or having a lot of stuff of the same product category. What I also wanted to mention is in which way companies can benefit from this type of consumption, this type of communication. And I put here 3 main points, which is, of course, more in a more strategic perspective to increase or generate, first of all, new revenues and opportunities for sale, then also increase the perception of being a quality provider and responsible company, which is maybe more an altruistic motive or benefit, and also to align with sustainable business values. And I think this is something Laura spoke about when she presented the elements of a sufficiency business model. What comes next? Also there are some studies, and there's work on the actual impact, the actual effectiveness of this kind of communication and marketing, and regarding the attitudes of consumers towards the communication and also the company behind the communication. It was shown that in general, those messages like don't buy this jacket or consume less, that they are perceived as attractive and appealing. So positive consumer reactions towards the messages. And also compared to consumption promoting messages, those messages are the sufficiency-oriented or promoting messages are perceived more positive. And not surprisingly, that sufficiency promoting communication is more reliable when it is aligned with the business model or the company perception, the company reputation, sending or using this type of communication. There's also research on the effectiveness of sufficiency promoting communication for behavior change. And this is what we, or which is intended by companies when they really in a reliable and in a reliable way really want to achieve sufficiency, then of course they want to achieve and promote behavior change towards reduced consumption. And the studies we are using or citing here, they have shown mixed results. First of all, consume less appeals have been shown in an experimental study to be effective in reducing shopping spending. I think this study looked at grocery consumption, but it has been also shown that sufficiency promoting communication, particularly in social media, has only short-term positive effects. So the long-term effectiveness is still an open question. And with this, I will come to some barriers we have identified in the literature. And this is what we are also, or would like to discuss here in this webinar with you. And first of all, I think it's obvious that the current economic model, which is centered on growth and competition and seen as an essential for society progress and prosperity, that this is a main barrier or a huge barrier for companies adopting sufficiency business models or marketing strategies. And Laura mentioned that, we have investigated, or that they have selected around 160 businesses, and maybe, or definitely there are more out there, but these are this is the number of companies which have been researched in detail, and the sheer number is quite low, as you might have also realized. Only like 200 companies we are aware of that are following or that are applying a sufficiency orientation. And this is, in our view, mainly due to the fact that those companies are at odds with the prevailing growth paradigm. And as I already mentioned, not surprisingly, and also there's a lot of research out there on degrowth, of course, and on alternative economics. And I think that's very influential and very interesting also to look at when we discuss or when we investigate the barriers of sufficiency-oriented companies. Then next to the growth-oriented economy, consumer cultures also, or the current consumer culture and tendencies to overconsumption are a major barrier to sufficiency because it prevents a broader change in cultural and social norms to combat overconsumption. And also, yeah, we presented some marketing and communication campaigns promoting sufficiency, but most of the marketing out there is doing the exact opposite, stimulating consumer desires and trying to increase the consumption and consumption levels, or purchase of new stuff. And also greener consumption has long been advocated as like the simple solution for sustainable consumption or for sustainability, and sufficiency has been equated with sacrifice, and that's not so attractive as we know from consumer research. People don't want to be confronted or want to be obliged to consume less for environmental or social reasons. And that's not, I mean, I don't want to say that sufficiency means sacrifice. It is more, or should be better understood as a way, as a lifestyle of reduced consumption, and therefore getting having more time for other stuff, for social relationships, spending your time not only to go to work to earn money and then to put your money in or buying new stuff from your money. And I think that's also a debate in research on sustainable consumption, how we can frame, or how we can, what the narrative of sufficiency should be to be more attractive to, let's say, the mainstream consumer. And then we also identified barriers on the micro level of companies, and here, or not only of companies, but also of society. And here, one reason which hinders, or one phenomenon which hinders sufficiency to be scaled up, is the understanding of consumption as only an individual choice or an individual responsibility. And this is, in our view, consistent with the economic liberal framework that prioritizes consumer freedom over broader systemic change, or also it's a topic of intergenerational justice. And there's some research out there looking at framework conditions for social diffusion of sufficiency behavior or sufficiency initiatives, grassroots initiatives, but the scaling potential is rather limited by the nature of social institutions, which have less power and less resources compared to commercial actors. And then last but not least, it's the shareholder-driven business logic, which is a barrier for companies to adopt sufficiency strategies. And one way out would be to move away from this short-term maximization of shareholder value, and instead focusing on alternative forms or business models, such as purpose-driven models, family businesses, or any other ownership structures. And now it's again you, Laura.
It is, and I'll wrap it up very quickly because we want to have time for questions and discussion. We have a lot of ideas for future research. This isn't just Maike and I. We actually have a network of researchers meeting monthly. If you're interested in sufficiency businesses, let us know. You're obviously welcome to join. And we brainstormed a lot of different things we could look into in the future, but I'll skip that. So let me know if you want to know more about it. And just to the next slide, Maike. Do a very brief bit of shameless self-promotion. 2 weeks ago, Maike and I published an open access book on sufficiency in business, which has brilliant contributions from a variety of authors with different backgrounds, different disciplines, trying to understand, what does sufficiency in business mean conceptually, but also what are actual case studies, what is already being done, and how does it fit into the larger market structure. So feel free to have a look at it. The PDF is freely available. And we're looking forward to your questions.
Great, thank you very much to both, and thanks for staying on time as well. So we've got about 25 minutes or so here remaining in the hour-long session for questions and comments and discussion, and I open up the floor to the group as a whole. Anybody want to go first? Stephen, it's to you.
Hi, thanks guys for the very, very interesting talk. I wanted to see if you could talk a bit about the cultural differences. You teased that piece, so I would be interested if you could share a little bit about that and how sufficiency is perceived in different cultures.
Yeah, I might, if that's all right with Maike. Yes, I was going to talk a bit about it in the future research. So we've noticed, for instance, that in the German-speaking or French-speaking world, there's quite a bit of discussion about sufficiency. And in France, for instance, especially with the energy crisis, sobriété, the equivalent of sufficiency, has actually been adopted into policy. So it's a lot more familiar to people, so to say. But where I live and work in the Netherlands, for instance, the equivalent of sufficiency is consuminderen, which is less consuming. And it's still considered a bit of a taboo word because it's not really something that's taken up in society yet. So I think it's definitely something that needs to be discussed also in the cultural context of what people would usually find normal to do in terms of sustainability. Is sufficiency something they would consider possible?
Interesting, and I mean, you mentioned, yeah, go ahead.
Stephen, go ahead.
Oh, well, I was just wondering if it, in the context of these sufficiency businesses, you mentioned Japan specifically. Is there something on the messaging there that's unique? I'm a bit interested in Japan.
Unfortunately, I don't have any specific insights from Japan. It was more that the company worked in several countries, and I think Japan and the UK and Germany, people were quite happy with the idea of sufficiency in the business, but it wasn't something that their American customers were very happy with. But that was just anecdotal evidence.
Okay, understood. Thanks.
All right, I was going to pose a follow-up question to Stevens, but I'll defer on that and pass the baton to Joachim.
Okay, thank you for the presentation, but I wonder, because if we really want to be successful with sufficiency, it must be something which is taking hold of the whole of the consumer class. And I wonder for whom are the arguments. When I hear that you feel better with having less, well, half of the people in my city district are living on public transfers. If I tell that to them, they're going to kick me in the ass. So that's not the right group. If it's only for a message for high income personalities, well, they can afford what is the usual strategy, having high quality and upper end products, which are then also expensive enough to justify a long time investment in repairing, caring, maintaining, and so forth. But that needs a high up end. It can even be money saving, but it needs a high upfront investment, and that's only there for the minority of society. So I wonder really, for whom is this a kind of a message? A company which goes out and says, buy less, but ours. is something which is can be convincing, but if all companies do that, in the end, the competition is fierce. So my impression is that we have two ways to embed the whole ideas. One is that probably it needs a legal framework to create a more level playing ground. In another context, I've been writing book chapters is very in at the moment. So in another context, I've been writing a chapter on the role of extended producer responsibility. If you had that, much of what you have mentioned would become more or less mandatory. And in that sense, then the sufficiency companies would be an extremely helpful laboratory for rolling out different business models under a different legal framework. So the role of the legal framework, I think, is very important. And the second thing is, we know that lots of consumption has to do with status signaling, and that consumption levels are significantly higher and the people are more dedicated to consumption in countries which are more uneven. So probably also the social justice and distributional issues have to be taken into account, maybe as part or in combination with the cultural issues, when you really want to come to a solution of this drive to more and more consumption. So could you imagine that the models you have been analyzing will remain niche models as long as the current framework is the same in a competitive market, and which kind of changes of circumstances would be needed to make them being rolled out to the business at large?
Okay, a lot there. Let me pass it over to the two of you and let you work it out between the two of you, how you want to respond.
Yeah, maybe I can start in responding to what you said with I mean, the companies we have investigated, they also struggle with the question of growth and how they, I mean, if they grow and in a way they cannot control if this adds to more consumption overall, or if they take like customers from other companies, which would be one strategy, or this is one strategy they or one argument for them to discuss this growth question. Also, they, in offering more services instead of selling new stuff, this is also one way how they handle the growth, or this tension arising from the growth question. But overall, or in general, I think that's a really important but still open question, which is not really, or yeah, where possible solutions. And I mean, you also talked about legal framework and policies, and I think it's not a point which we, or where companies and consumers alone have to find solutions. It's also a question of, yeah, a legal and policy related question.
Laura,
maybe Laura, you want to add on this
further?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, entirely agree with what Maike said. They're really good questions, Joachim, and also very much specific questions that we ask ourselves, and that the companies that we found asked themselves as well, because a lot of them may be catering to a more affluent part of the population. But I think one thing to remember here is that not just globally, but also specifically in our global north context, the people that should reduce the consumption are specifically the people that are over-consuming. So sufficiency and the idea of consumption corridors tries to get everyone into the space of enough consumption, but not too much. So we wouldn't want people to reduce their consumption if they can't even have enough, if they're living on, you know, limited payments. The businesses are struggling with that though, because even if they want to mainly target the rich customers, they also want to give good examples or alternatives to everyone. So they're trying sometimes with services, repair services, or reuse offers, for instance, to give different price points. It's not necessarily the best solution yet, but it's one way they try to do it. And related to the legal framework, I entirely agree with what you said and what Maike said. It's not just the businesses that have to work on it. It's very much something that needs policy change, that needs cultural change. And as you said, there is great work on, for instance, could extended producer responsibilities do something? And they would help a lot. But also if the businesses broadly are forced to bring in the extended producer responsibility, but they do not have sufficiency as their purpose, or they do not actually internalize it, it's not necessarily enough, I would worry. So yeah, that's maybe more of a cultural shift, of a societal shift towards the idea that sufficiency is something that should underlie our society, and that might also require more systemic change.
Okay, thank you. Asa, please.
Yes, thank you for a very interesting presentation. I was wondering, and it's perhaps very much in line with what you said now, Laura. Thinking of individualization of responsibility as a barrier, which I also see very much in my own research on sufficiency, it's important to talk about the individual responsibility among affluent individuals, but how can we, do you see any, what possibilities do you see from moving from that towards a responsibilization rather of businesses? And I think you were touching on it, Laura, like stronger frameworks and regulations and so on. But do you see any possibilities for such a responsibilization, and how can that happen?
I mean, there is some.
I'll let the two of you decide on how you want to proceed.
Yeah, first of all, I would like to refer to one chapter in our book, which is on policy regulations or opportunities, and also policies which would oblige or make it easier for companies to follow a sufficiency approach. And I just wanted to briefly mention what is going on in the EU at the moment. I mean, the right to repair was, I think, just passed last week, so that the national governments have now to integrate it in the in national law. There's also the eco-design. The law on eco-design, which helps in only producing high quality, long-lasting, modular, whatever products. I think, there are a few policy already out there helping in getting better products, or products which help consumers to follow or to adopt a sufficiency-oriented lifestyle. But maybe we also have to imagine more radical policies, like, I don't know, caps for consumption, maybe also for production, or amount of resources and material. I'm not an expert in this, but I think there are some good suggestions and ideas out there.
So I have a question I'd like to pose about aging and demographic transition. Whether in your research you see any differences across the lifespan and perhaps maybe a bit more provocative, whether current trends of demographic aging in Europe and elsewhere kind of create the preconditions for a sort of sufficiency transition that is in some respects inevitable. And whether you have any thoughts about that. And perhaps also focusing on the degree to which kind of the current generation of Gen Z or millennials are perhaps more inclined to embrace a sufficiency-oriented business message.
I'm
right,
going to give it a
Maike, why don't you go first?
I think I might briefly because I just unmuted myself. So Maike can add on to this. There hasn't been specific evidence in the research I've done on demographic differences, but there is quite a bit of research on, for instance, secondhand consumption of different generations. And it seems that Gen Z, for instance, is much more open to consuming sustainably, to consuming reused or rental items, but they also seem to be very much comfortable with conspicuous consumption and fast fashion and just these ideas that are standard in society. So it doesn't seem that they have embraced a much more sustainable consumer culture yet, but maybe Maike has something to add to that. No.
No, I was just laughing because it was an invitation to blame the boomers. But no, nothing to add.
Well, I mean, I wasn't necessarily blaming the boomers. I was also trying to point out that, you know, I wouldn't necessarily call it inevitable, but a notable trend is as households age, you know, demand for large-scale consumer items declines. Then there's a certain shifting in the consumer package that occurs. But to some degree, we see a certain embrace of minimalism among sort of Gen Z folks. So we see kind of separate trends, similar trends occurring at sort of both ends of the age spectrum, and whether some of these businesses that you're focusing on, you know, are obviously aware of what's happening and are specifically targeting folks with those kinds of sensibilities. But I see another hand from Stefano. So Stefano, please go ahead. We've got a few more minutes to go.
Thank you so much. Hi to everyone, first of all. I would like to ask something about if you like, what do you think about the competitiveness? I think I don't know if you deal also with like this topic in the book, but like, what do you think is the relationship between the company who want to apply like sufficiency with the competitiveness? Because like usually I think one of the main narrative for a company who like doesn't want like to shift is that like they're not competitive in this case. So what is like your overview on like this?
I might attempt an answer. Yes, so we have these 150, 160 companies that we've looked at, and we also, as part of the research, try to understand what is the viability of their strategies. We try to understand what are their governance, ownership, and finances, and to what extent can they actually be profitably run. So the companies in the database are any scale. You find small and medium enterprises, but you also find big corporations that are given as examples for sufficiency promoting businesses. And I think the very, very common example, Patagonia, that many people refer to, is quite profitable. So there is quite some companies that can be competitive promoting sufficiency, but I think for those, then the question arises of whether they're being genuine in promoting sufficiency. And that's what Maike touched upon. They question themselves, should they grow, should they not grow? Because really, by selling more, they go against that principle, but also by selling to more people, they might displace or replace less sustainable alternatives. So it's a bit of a catch-22, and they haven't really found a solution, but there's definitely competitive examples. And maybe Maike? No.
Well, the question and the response has me reflecting on Tom Pynchon's book from a number of years ago, distinctions that he makes, with respect to family-owned businesses, and that many of the enterprises that back in the day that he had looked at, speak to certain values that are part of the sort of founder's mentality, and that over time and transitions of ownership, that those then kind of drift away. And I'd be interested to, of the 160 that you've focused on, if any or how many are, sort of fit that description.
Yeah, it's been a very similar finding. So I don't have the actual numbers in front of me now. We also couldn't find the ownership for all of the businesses, but it was a large amount that was either family owned or founder owned. And then oftentimes, similar to what you were saying, if they became bigger or would have changed ownership, they could potentially lose their values. So yeah, a historical analysis might be interesting to see if that happened to businesses, but current day, the sufficiency promoting businesses oftentimes are owned by the original founder or the founding families.
We've got 2 minutes. Anyone else have a compelling question, or even a non-compelling question posed to Maike and Laura? Well,
everyone wants to go back to work.
Well, not seeing any hands, I'll actually use the opportunity to take a prerogative of the chair. I mean, we're speaking here in English, and we have a number of other language traditions and cultures represented among the dozen or so folks who are part of this call. My own experience is that we tend to encounter challenges in speaking about sufficiency in a valorized way in English, and noting that there's been this upsurge of interest in sufficiency over the last number of years in Germany, Finland, Sweden, some of the other countries represented among folks in the group here. I'm wondering whether you have any reflections on that, and whether, when you're working in other languages other than English, that there's terminology that you can draw on that provides a more sort of heroic way of discussing sufficiency.
Well, from a German point of view, we talk about sufficiency using the term Suffizienz, because we haven't found a suitable German word for it. And at least for the intellectuals, we can refer to sufficienz as coming from Latin and meaning enoughness. So it's enough for everybody, but not more than that. But it also avoids the fear of the low-income groups that they would have less than enough. So that's the balance we have to strike, because there is no really appealing word, so we use a foreign language word.
Maike, Laura?
Yeah, I also observed that there, when we look at the consumer behavior, that there are many concepts out there, like anti-consumption, voluntary simplicity, and they all have a history, or even are have been researched for a longer time than sufficiency lifestyles. So I'm also sometimes wondering whether it really adds something new to the discussion when we talk about, or when we call it sufficiency. And and would be great to have maybe a meta-analysis or review comparing these different concepts and highlighting the differences, but also what they have in common. Yeah.
Yeah, also for the French example, I was working with some colleagues in Grenoble recently, and sobriété, the sobriety is what they use when they speak English, but it's slightly different in English to use sobriety. So they also almost entirely focus on energy sufficiency, because that was what was so nationally discussed. So if you talk to a French academic about sufficiency, the vast majority of the time they will talk about changing your energy consumption. And then when you say, well, what about actually buying less stuff or reducing your consumption in terms of other resources like water or minerals, that's not something that's part of the national discussion yet. So I think it really is important how we phrase it, and it also, yeah, really can influence what way the consumption might change.
The connection to the French term and to sort of English translation of sobriety also raises the connections to temperance and historical examples of limiting and reducing alcohol consumption, a century and more ago, and whether there are perhaps some interesting parallels between social movements that came together to encourage either reductions or outright bans on alcohol consumption, which has gone through a process of transformation over the last century or so. All right, I think we're past the top of the hour. I don't want to hold anybody here unnecessarily. Thanks to everybody for joining, especially to Maike and Laura for a fascinating presentation. Thanks to everybody who has participated in the conversation. This is also just to say administratively, this is going to be our last webinar for before we take a summer break over the next couple of months, and then we will resume in September. We have not yet filled out the slate of presenters. So if there's anyone within the group that's still with us here today who would like to offer their chapter as a focus for an upcoming webinar, please do not hesitate to be in touch. I'm not sure Ria is still with us, other members of the editorial team. Stephen, have I forgotten anything or anything you'd like to add before we break?
No, I just really enjoyed today. I've enjoyed the series of webinars, and it's great to see so many folks joining and the nice discussions we've been having. So have a nice summer break, and hopefully everything is good in your world.
Okay, well, yeah, from my side as well, best wishes for a pleasant summer, and anybody who's going to be in Helsinki for the Future Earth meeting taking place there, or the SRI meeting, which is due to take place next week in Helsinki, I will see you there. And I suspect others of us will have overlapping travels over the next few months. And so there'll be lots of serendipitous meetings and reunions. With that said, have a wonderful summer, and hope to see you all in September, if not before then. Bye.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.